Fontaines DC are one of the biggest indie bands to come out of the last 5 years, and with their new album, that just came out by the way, the band is probably at the peak of their career. Now, how exactly did this band achieve this sudden fame? Did all this attention come from pure talent, or did they have to sign a deal with the devil? Who are Fontaines DC, and where did they come from? I'm gonna try to answer all these very intriguing questions on today's video, and I'm also gonna dive deeper into some sellout accusations that have been going around in their community. So make sure to subscribe if you're a music nerd like me, and enjoy. This is the story of Fontaines DC, and the real truth about their authenticity. I want to start off this video by saying that I'm very openly a big fan of the band, and there's no point in pretending I'm not. But when I do go through the sellout accusations, I'm gonna try to be as unbiased as I can. I've always been of the opinion that even if the band are a bunch of douchebags, you should be able to separate the art from the artist if the art is good enough. Now, who are Fontaines DC? Fontaines DC are a post-punk band from Ireland that happens to be a big fan of their country's poetry, and a big fan of their country in general. This love for poetry is what actually got the members of the band together, after they met each other at the BIMM Music College in the Liberties. The band would bond over Irish boys like Patrick Kavanagh, James Joyce, and also the Beat Generation. This inspired them to release 2 collections of poetry, called Vroom and Windig. Now you'll see that this is the main focus of the band really. It's poetry and Ireland. Grian Chatton, the frontman of the band, would get involved in poetry from a very young age, because his dad would give him football cards if he learned his poems. His love for poetry would become very clear during the band's discography, and it would all start with Dogrel.
You know I love that violence that you get around here, that kind of ready steady violence.
The title Dogrel came from kind of poetry that was around in the early 20th century, basically the time of the Boer War, and it was from a working class perspective.
I think the album that reminds me the most of Dogrel is the Smiths' debut. Both bands take poetry, which is usually seen as a high-class art form, and use it to describe your working class and the struggles your everyday person goes through. Just like the Smiths were describing Manchester 40 years ago, Fontaines DC are describing Dublin and Ireland, and it works wonderfully. Despite the bands having pretty different styles of lyricism, you can tell that the Manchester scene was very influential to them. And funnily enough, the Manchester scene was pretty much built by the Irish, with most of the members of these iconic bands being working class men with Irish parents. So what goes around comes around, I guess. The songs are obviously very well thought out because of both Grian's and Carlos's huge love for poetry. This is the kind of songwriting quality that bands can take years to reach, or never reach at all, said Ben Beaumont Thomas for The Guardian. At this point, authenticity was already a huge part of Fontaines DC, with the band actually practicing these songs in a shed. Nothing more working class than that, I guess. Now we'll see if they keep this authenticity in the years to come. Dogrel released on April 12th of 2019 to absolutely huge critical acclaim. It won a Mercury Prize and got nominated for Album of the Year at the Choice Music Prize. The band felt like they were actually doing something important with their work. Those nights where they would get drunk and write with each other had actually formed into an amazingly impressive album. They were bringing the issues ahead with Ireland and the gentrification of Dublin into the main stage, and the people were behind them from the very start. Songs like Boys in the Better Land and Liberty Bell are still one of the band's biggest songs, and it's because they truly came from the heart. Liberty Bell was actually named after the Liberties, the area where the band grew up on. They had seen the way their hometown was transformed, and they used their songs to speak up on these things and bring light to the whole issue. Also, another thing I want to talk about is how much of a risk it is to make a post-punk album in the year of 2019, at least in my opinion. I know post-punk has been in a slow increase in the past few years, but it never went mainstream like it did 40 years ago, or 20 years ago with the Strokes. It's pretty rare to find big post-punk bands nowadays, and it's even rare to find good post-punk bands. But still, the boys took the risk, and it paid out handsomely by kick-starting their career. Dogrel picked at number 9 on the UK charts, but it would get even bigger online with the band's growth in the later years. After a 2019 tour with Idols and an amazing debut album in their chamber, the band would quickly get back in the studio to work on their second album, which would release 1 year later. On the 31st of July, Fontaines DC released their second studio album, A Hero's Death.
I don't belong to anyone. I don't belong to anyone.
A Hero's Death takes a different, more spiritual approach compared to Dogrel. The band wanted to make this known with the very first track. We could have put something like A Hero's Death as the first track, but I think any tune that was a bit like Dogrel would have given the wrong first impression to the listener. We just wanted to make sure from the get-go that this album is a different thing, said Carlos for Stereo Gum. The band were already a bit burnt out from Dogrel just because they never expected it to get this big this fast. They went from getting drunk, writing poetry with each other and practicing in a shed to relentless international tours, which is a big change for anyone out there. With the band's success also came a lot of criticism, which still goes to this day, and it certainly didn't help with their mental health. At the same time, Grian had just entered a really serious relationship, so the whole thing was taking a toll on him. These feelings became very obvious in the band's work, with gloomy lyrics about individualism, love, and life. When we were recording it as well, I remember Dan described it as a party that's next door, that you're not really invited to. That love is the main thing mantra being the thing. You want to be there, you want to join in with the rest of the happy people, chat and talking about love is the main thing. The band wouldn't just change their style lyrically, but musically as well. The album ended up sounding more dreamy and psychedelic compared to their debut, which was probably inspired by bands like the Beach Boys, and it just works. It really fits with the whole life-questioning lyrics. I feel incredibly uncomfortable glorifying the past, even if it's an immediate past. Maybe especially if it's an immediate past. Because I'm fearful of having my life be over or whatever, if I look back on it too much. I think I actually wrote down the words, "life ain't always empty," over and over again. Quite manic, you know? Chatting on a hero's death. The album was pretty much praised by most critics, even though there were some of them who actually didn't like it as much as Dogrel. I think Anthony Fontana said that he didn't like it. Now, commercially is where it gets interesting, because they actually competed with Taylor Swift. Because of the success of their debut and the singles they released for the album, A Hero's Death was actually projected to hit number 1 on the UK charts, and they actually had outsold Folklore in the middle of their first week by 10,000 copies. Now what Taylor Swift did was release the physical CD copies of Folklore 3 days before they were scheduled, just so they could fuck over Fontaines DC, and it unfortunately worked. Folklore outsold A Hero's Death by only 3,500 copies. It was sort of like a weird sense of being flattered, because the idea that a massive corporation is afraid of losing face to a group of lads from Dublin is hilarious to me, said Shadden. Real petty shit, but it's not the only time she's done this. Anyways, after this release, the band started writing songs for their third album, despite being slightly delayed because of reasons. On 22nd of April 2022, Fontaines DC released their biggest album yet, Skinty Fia. With Skinty Fia, the band goes back to their Irish roots and dive even deeper into the history of the country and the state of it now. The whole theme of this album is Ireland, the love and the hate they might have for it. This hate not of the land, but of the people who run it and are bringing it down. The band is worried that Ireland is losing its true self due to gentrification, class divides, mass immigration, and well, capitalism. Modern Ireland is turning into something unrecognizable for them, and they don't like that. The title of the album, Skinty Fia, means the damnation of the deer, and along with the album cover, they reference the extinct Irish elk, this of course being a metaphor for Ireland itself. It also talks about England and its relationship with the Irish people. There's a story in the papers about a woman from Coventry in England. I think she was an Irish woman who moved to Coventry. She was an old woman called Margaret Kane. She died, and when she died, her family wanted to commemorate her Irish heritage by including these words on her gravestone. The words basically mean, "in our hearts forever." It's just a heartfelt message, but the Church of England itself ruled it that it was at risk of being perceived as a political slogan, so they refused to allow the Irish language to exist on an Irish person's gravestone. The shocking part, which I've left at the end of the story for dramatic effect for you, is that this was 2 years ago. This wasn't the 70s or anything like that. This is at the start of the pandemic that this happened. Roman Holiday is also another song from the album that talks about being Irish in England, sort of embracing the fact that people are never really gonna accept you because of your origin, and wearing that as a badge of honor, because fuck them. The album's lyrics are bold and really depict the pride that the band has for their homeland. Along with these lyrics, we get some of the darkest instrumentals of the band's discography, with some songs sounding straight up gothic. In my opinion, this is the band's best work to date. Well, at least for now, since I haven't listened to the new album as I'm writing this script. But I think it'll be hard for this new album to top Skinty Fia in terms of quality and emotional baggage. Commercially, Skinty Fia is again the band's best work to date. It hit number 1 on the Irish charts and UK charts, It hit number 2 in the Netherlands and got top 10 in Belgium, France, Germany and Switzerland. Also, Jack It Down the Line and I Love You became the band's most streamed songs on Spotify, with the latter one gaining some good traction on TikTok as well. So Skinty Fia was undoubtedly a huge success, and is the main reason why the band managed to create so much hype for their upcoming release. Now, with this upcoming release also starts a controversy. There was a printed article written by Gary Salonley for Breastneck Press, which was called "Is It Too Real For You? Fontaines DC as an Irish neoliberal psyop." I will link the whole thing down below for anyone who wants to read it, but for all the lazy people out there, it basically talks about how Fontaines DC writes about the gentrification of Dublin and Ireland, but in real life they're actually hypocrites. Why, you might ask? Because they're managed by Trevor Diaz. Quote, "Trevor is also the manager of the Workman's and Garage Bar, 2 bar venues in Dublin's city centre. Both of these bars are operated by the Press Up Entertainment Group, of which Diaz is an employee. Press Up operate a large amount of bars, venues, restaurants and hotels around Dublin. In a very strong sense of the word, Press Up are one of the major gentrifiers of Dublin. Their venues operate in a completely decontextualized and ahistorical manner in relation to their areas and the communities they exist in. The portrait of character they try to create through their venues is completely fabricated and attempts to co-opt cultures or genres in a periods only, and in a way that's extremely Instagrammable, primed for Love in Dublin's list, and most importantly, extremely profitable. It also goes on deeper about how the owners of Press Up also own a development company called Oakmont, which quote, knock and rebuild buildings with their typical modern gleam. Once the buildings are refurbed, the lease is then handed to Press Up to install a prefabricated and pre-aged fit-out in the style of whatever trend has there or the public's attention at the time. Gary goes on to talk about how Fontaines DC are being used by Press Up as psyop. Their talking points are political just enough for the public to recognize, but not so much that they'll act upon them in any meaningful way. His words, not mine. He says the band is being used not only to control the discourse, but also to co-opt it, which I think the last part is a bit of a stretch. I think it's fair to call out the band for working for shitty companies and people, but a liberal psyop is a bit of a conspiracy theory. Still, take what I say with a huge grain of salt. As I said, I am very biased because I'm obviously a fan of the band. This is the only time where I'll put my hands up and play the journalist, because I don't know the slightest thing about Ireland or Dublin. I've never stepped foot in Ireland in my life. These claims may be 100% true and very serious for the country as well, and I don't want to accidentally say anything dumb to make people angry. I know I wouldn't want any Irish people to mansplain to me the political situation of Albania. Still, this article started resurfacing again because of the band's recent changes. They went from Partisan Records to XL Recordings, and with this transition also came a brand new colorful look. The band adapted a new clothing style which was very much created by some expensive designers and made some fans doubt their band's authenticity. Did they sell out now that they're wearing funky designer clothes? What happened to the working class boys from Dublin? Were they a liberal psyop this whole time? This whole discord about clothes is a bit silly to me, but I think the article from Gary Salonley did make some good points. I don't think what the band wears matters as long as the album is good. Speaking of that, as I'm writing the script, the album isn't out yet, but I'm gonna give my reaction in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I wrote this part at 1 AM after the album came out, so this is my first thoughts on it. It's nice, it's definitely way more experimental than their other albums. I think since Dogrel the band has slowly driven into this direction, and Romance sounds way different than the other 3 albums. Some of the songs were like dreamy and psychedelic, which I liked a lot. Desire was amazing. Hoarseness is the Whatness was good lyrics as well. And then you have the more high energy songs like Starburster, Here's the Thing, Bug and Death King. I really liked Starburster, so I'm glad the band went into that direction. It's pretty cool stuff. And to end it all, we have the most gorgeous closing song ever, Favorite. The song was released a month ago and it might be my most played song this year. I genuinely love it. Pretty good shit. As much as everyone wanted it, I'm glad they didn't make Skinty Fia too. I'm not gonna give a score because I hate putting number ratings on a piece of art, but I'll definitely recommend it. I'm pretty satisfied. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of the band and their new direction in the comments. Going back to that article, I do generally think it made a lot of good points, but as I said, I'm not from Dublin and I can't really say that much about it. It's up for you guys to decide. Musically speaking, I like the band a lot and I like the new direction they're taking, even if the outfits are kind of terrible. Subscribe, let me know any other topics you want me to talk about, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. Love you all.